ready. We're prepared. Do not give in to fear. We are fearless. This is not the time to be afraid. This is a time to stand up and fight back and to resist any temptation for them to divide us. We're in this together. The rule of law is on our side. We will not give in, not give up. We will not capitulate. We will not bow. We will not bend. We will survive.
Dr. Joel, you are very popular on the social media. Did you know what was the first video that you did, and what was it about that caught fire?
Yeah. So just to give people context that are listening, I started creating videos online on TikTok and Instagram about 5 years ago. It was at the start of the COVID pandemic, and I was also in my first year of medical school. And for me, I went to Washington State University for medical school, and I quickly learned once I got there that I was a part of the third class of students, but myself and one other student were the first two Black students at our medical school, even though that there had been over 200 students that had come through before. And I remember thinking, wow, this is kind of crazy, but also not being surprised, because if you look at the entire landscape of healthcare, less than 5% of physicians are Black in general, male or female. And so I came into Washington State University wanting to make sure that I was adding my voice at a time where, one, COVID was happening. Two, there's a lot of racial injustice from George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and all these stories I just could not get out of my head. I remember Ahmaud Arbery was the same age that I was. And I used to love going for runs outside around my area. But after he was killed, I was so scared to go into my community because it was a mainly kind of purple Republican / leaning more red than blue. But all those things were on my mind. And so I started creating videos online talking about things that I was not seeing in my medical school classes that I wish we were talking about more. And the first video I made was about this device called a pulse oximeter. They're small devices. They go on your finger when you go to the hospital, and they measure what's called your blood oxygen saturation level, how much oxygen is bound to your red blood cells. And I saw a study that in the New England Journal of Medicine that essentially said, if you have darker skin tones, these pulse oximeters that we use every single day in the hospital to understand if you're short of breath are 3 times as likely to read as inaccurate and overestimated in people with darker skin tones. And I remember I thought to myself when I read that, one, I've done my pulmonology and my cardiology classes. How have we never talked about this? And two, what could that mean in the COVID pandemic when, one, the FDA is telling people to go and buy this device at home to use it on yourself to understand your oxygen saturation? And then two, the fact that it could be sending people home early. You know, if you need to get oxygen, you may be sent home early. Subsequent studies came out and actually showed that that was true, that because of these disparities with the pulse oximeters, Black Americans are more likely to be sent home without supplemental oxygen when they actually needed it.
When you think about, I was actually had an interview this morning with Dr. Sharon Malone. And we were talking a little bit about, you know, she's a gynecologist, and we're talking about menopause and fibroids and everything, and how Black women don't, you know, get treated the same. And you know, and I don't know if it's baked in, because I don't think people become doctors to be bad people and to be racist. Yeah. It's just part of the soil, you know, it's in the air, it's in the water. But, you know, I was talking about the so-called godfather of gynecology, and you know, while he made discoveries, the torturous way in which he experimented on Black women's bodies is just horrific. And we don't talk about it. You know, it's like from the inception, we've been from Henrietta Lacks's cells that everyone uses, and billions of dollars have been made off of one Black woman. You think about the disrespect, or is it willful? What have you found, Dr. Joel?
Yeah, I think what I've found is it isn't willful, that these are biases that have existed in our society that then become ingrained into medicine, that this is not, that this is a symptom of a greater disease of how it's actually being manifested in medicine. And so all the examples that you just laid out, J. Marion Sims, right, the father of modern gynecology, quote unquote, he built his entire legacy by experimenting on enslaved Black women without anesthesia. But as you mentioned, he's become known and praised as a medical innovator despite literally hurting women, kids. And 3 of those women names are known: Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsy. And I always try and say their names so that we
Thank you.
remember them. But Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsy, Anarcha herself was experimented on over 30 times by Dr. Sims. And he described their suffering in detail, writing about how Lucy nearly died from sepsis after one of his surgeries, or that or that it was successful because he was able to form the vaginal fistula surgery. But all these things for decades have happened, and Sims's name has been on hospitals, awards, and statues, but we've turned a blind eye. Similarly, as you mentioned, Henrietta Lacks, the story of a woman who went in to be treated for cervical cancer, was found to have cells that were able to rapidly multiply in a way that no other cells were found to be able to. Her cells were taken without her consent, have now been used in nearly every single experiment in the world in labs all across the world. But her family had no idea. Her descendants had no idea. Henrietta had no idea. And I think these are just symptoms of a disease of medicine overall. If you think, even if you go all the way back to the understanding of how race even became ingrained into what it was, science was always there as a way to kind of connect with it and justify what race meant and why specifically slavery was needed. Just to even further highlight like how insidious that was, there were medical diseases for people that were slaves that ran away. One was called drapetomania.
Drapetomania. Yeah.
Exactly. Disease of the runaway slave. And so if you were running away, you weren't seen as trying to seek freedom. You were seen as having a disease. These are all ways that medicine has been complicit over the years. And I think to this day in the 21st century, we are still trying to go back and unroot those things out or uproot those things out of medicine. And so I say all that to say that I don't think it's intentional. I think it's the society we live in where racism is still baked, systemic racism is baked into it. But the problem in medical school is if we don't actually call it out, we end up perpetuating it. And that doesn't matter what your race is. You can be a black doctor and still perpetuate it if you don't understand the history and how negative ideas of race can actually be impacting people. And I'll just give one quick example of that. But when I came to medical school, I learned about this equation called the GFR equation. It stands for glomerular filtration rate. GFR is essentially a function of how well your kidneys work. If you have a high GFR number, your kidneys work well. If you have a low GFR number, your kidneys don't work very well. For decades, there'd been a racial correction that essentially said if you are black, and only if you're black, we're going to overestimate your kidney equation by multiplying it by 1.3. And I'm
Wow.
sure a lot of people are going there, yeah, exactly. Why was that? Well, you go back to the original study that was done in 1999, and they found that in their small subpopulation, in their research study of black people had a higher level of this muscle breakdown protein called creatinine. And so they were actually trying to adjust for that by saying, hey, we don't want to accidentally diagnose people with these diseases. The mistake they made, though, was that assuming that blackness is a monolith, that if you're black, that means that if you're West African, South African, East African, from Brazil and black, that you're all the same, when in fact, that's not the truth. And so what that equation ended up doing was making it harder for black patients to get diagnosed with chronic kidney disease, to go see a kidney specialist, and perhaps worst of all, to actually get kidney transplants, because the GFR is how we as doctors understand how bad your kidneys are functioning. It wasn't until 2021, 4 years ago, that a new equation was created that no longer included race. And in 2023, the Organ Procurement and Transplantation Network essentially said anyone that's had this equation used, we're going to go back and basically give reparations in a way for what's happened here. To date, more than 12,000 Black Americans have been moved up on the kidney transplant list because of that
Wow.
change that's been made.
Wow.
And I had a woman reach out to me on social media and say that she saw my video, she sent it to her sister with chronic kidney disease, and because she took it to her doctor, she was able to get moved up 5 years on the kidney transplant
That's
list.
amazing. So your work is penetrating. Dr. Joel Bervell is, and you can follow him at JoelBervell on Instagram and TikTok.
Mhm.
Peabody Award winner, of course. Time Magazine's 100. I think Forbes 100 under 30, 30 under 30.
Yeah, Forbes 30
You've
under
been
30.
30 under 30. Um, so you're in medical school.
Well,
What
done with
kind of
medical school.
no, you're in medical school. What were you going? What
Mm.
what was going to be your your specialty? What did you want to
Mm.
be
Yeah, so
going
I
to?
actually started off wanting to do orthopedic surgery. And part of the reason I wanted to do that was because it was the least diverse specialty that was out there. I went and did so many programs from Nth Dimensions, which is an incredible program that gets Black medical students integrated into the pipeline early. I spent summers doing research. I worked at Johns Hopkins for a year doing orthopedic surgery, specifically what's called reverse total shoulder replacements, which some people listening may have gotten before. But as I went through medical school, I realized that as much as I loved surgery and orthopedics, what I really found that I loved was understanding healthcare disparities. One of the best ways to see that is through internal medicine, which is where we are the front line at the hospital, dealing with people who maybe are houseless or dealing with people who have chronic conditions like heart failure or diabetes or hypertension, all these different conditions that affect so many people from our community. And I wanted to better learn how is it that hospitals can do better when we're actually looking at the front lines. So now I'm in my first year of medical residency in internal medicine, absolutely loving it. I just got off of nights, and so if my voice is still kind of gravelly, I'm still getting used to
No.
the daytime now, but it's been wonderful so far.
So I understand why it's taken so long to get you on these airwaves. No, I mean, what you're doing is so important. Coming here is gravy on top of the meal. But, I wanted people to hear if there's some young people, because we do have a lot of young people listening, they're in cars right now being picked up from school. I want them to be inspired that, we've been saying this, when you send your children to school, when you go to school and come back to the community and do something. This is not just about, a high salary. This is about making a difference. And what you've been doing with not just your medicine, but with your platform around medicine, even the skin diseases, which is one of the most popular, when you talk about somebody who has had eczema, how it shows up. I've always known that. Just simple things like why Band-Aids were flesh colored, but they were never my flesh color. Like it's all baked in. And if we don't know where the disparities are, we can't advocate for ourselves in them. So you're doing work that is so important.
We're ready. We're prepared. Do not give in to fear. We are fearless. This is not the time to be afraid. This is a time to stand up and fight back and to resist any temptation for them to divide us. We're in this together. The rule of law is on our side. We will not give in, not give up. We will not capitulate. We will not bow. We will not bend. We will